an article I wrote that came out in, I think, 2016, but maybe it was early 2017 for The Economist's lifestyle brand, which at the time was called Intelligent Life and is now called 1843, looked at what we knew about why women might want to write a story in which two heterosexual, seemingly, men fall in love, and how it's written in the style of romance or erotica novels aimed at women.
Mm-hmm.
And at the time, I didn't know that anybody was transitioning. I didn't know children were transitioning. I'd never given it any thought. I didn't know that significant numbers of the girls who write, and young women for these sites, had bought into something I'd never heard of, namely the idea that gender identity is real and sex isn't. So I came about 95% of the way to realizing that slash fiction might be a big influence on some of those girls. And then, a year later, I was asked again to commission or write a piece for the international section, and that one was on, why do so many kids say they're trans? And I got so into that I wrote a book, I left my job at The Economist, I became a campaigner, and I never again thought about fan fiction or slash. And I think it was a bit more than a year ago, probably about a bit less than a year and a half ago, and I can't remember exactly why, but someone said something to me, or I was thinking for the umpteenth time, why do very gender conforming people get the idea that they are trans? And there's a theory for the men, which is those gender conforming people have a condition called autophilia, which is a paraphilia, which is that they are sexually aroused by themselves as women, the idea of themselves as women. And you only have to think of some of the very high profile, very manly trans women to realize how gender conforming they are in their hard charging, bossy, overriding women, insulting women who don't step in line. Like they're super gender conforming people as men.
Mm-hmm. We spoke quite a lot of this last time we spoke on this podcast last year, yeah.
But the girls who were transitioning, the first girls who transitioned were like the women, the minority of women, the tiny number of women who transitioned, say, pre-2000, in that they were butch lesbians, or they were women who found being a woman so very painful in the sense of they were so very gender non-conforming that they just really hated being women. But this was not true anymore, and it hadn't been true since probably the early 2010s. A significant number of the girls who transition now were very girly girls. And I had talked to some of them, in particular one I'd interviewed, Helena, from my book. She told me how she had liked ice skating, and the fandom that she got into was to do with 1950s music, rock and roll. And she liked the skirts and the dancing, which is a very gendered style of dancing, it's couples. And it's not that she and I talked about slash, I don't think we did. I thought I remember when I was writing about slash, what people said to me was they said that these characters, although they're nominally men, they're not really men, they're in disguise, they're in drag. The male character, like the mention of the fact that they're male and their male bodies, even like the mention of their sexual organs, like this was even being described by the people who were studying Kirk/Spock back in the 1980s and 90s. They said, why the drag? Why do these women have to dress up what is actually basically a heterosexual couple as both men? And the answers they gave were to do with the unattractiveness of the source material of the women. Like women characters are much, much worse and fewer than male characters. To do with the fact that relationships often both in the world and in fiction between men and women are very unegalitarian, and they end with a happy ever after and the woman subsuming herself into the man's life. And I remembered this expression that somebody had used in a thesis that she'd written on slash fiction, in which she said that perhaps slash appeals to the woman who doesn't want to become Mrs. Hero, she wants to become a co-hero.
Mm.
And she has this ideal of a relationship that's a partnership of equals, where the two of you go on an adventure together. You don't fall in love with the adventurer, you two are an adventurer. And I thought, wow, I wonder, could slash be something to do with kids transitioning, girls transitioning specifically? And I went back and looked, and it was in plain sight. I can't believe I didn't see it straight away. So another thing that they said in these is that the boys and men are not very like boys and men. Like the same woman who had written this thesis about slash fiction, she said she had given some gay men that she knew some slash to read, and they thought it was hysterically funny. Like, that was the word she used, hysterical. And the men just laughed their arses off about it because it just isn't at all like gay sex to them. Like, it was like the endless sighings and yearnings, the manufactured misunderstandings, the sex wasn't described in a very visceral way. Like, it's hard to know what's penetrating what, but it has all the tropes of women's romance and erotic fiction, in which, I mean, the best way I can say is the way that porn presents women as men would wish women to be, which is, interested in variety, uninterested in foreplay, very interested in multiple partners. All of those things in porn are men's wish fulfillment about women. Well, in slash fiction, but in erotic fiction generally, the men are as women might wish them to be. So they're always talking about their feelings. They notice, the brand of clothing you're wearing. They're interested in things like, women's dainty wrists, or like she's got lovely long eyelashes, or things like. I've never met a straight man who has any idea what length any woman's eyelashes are. Like, really. But the men in erotic fiction do. They notice all these things. And so you realize that when you're writing these two men, and these two men are kind of like women in drag, basically, that if you're at a suggestible age and you're going through maybe female puberty, or you've had a tough time, or the boys in school are watching a lot of porn and talking about it, you're being sold an idea of what it might be to be a gay boy. That's not at all realistic, but is deeply appealing. Like, you're opting out of femininity, but you're not leaving behind things that are psychologically very important to you. And I mean, this has taken a while to explain, but the short thing that I've managed to learn to say to parents, because I have often said to parents, do you know what your daughter's reading? Like, they know to look and see what their son is looking at online, but they don't know to check what their daughter is reading. And they say, why, what? And, sometimes they actually say that their daughter writes fan fiction, and they think that's great, it's creative. And yes, it is great, it is creative, but are they sure what sort of thing she's reading? So I say to them, there's a lot of these stories in which they present being a gay boy as being something a bit like being a boy in a Korean boy band. That's the look, the fey, sweet, not very masculine at all sort of boy. And a lot of these girls, that's the boy they want to be. And that's the boy they imagine being when they transition.